Let's make sure this big one is cooked as much as the little ones. Not quite. Okay. Something I should advise you about when you're making these sort of things is, in order for the puree to be completely pureed, the proportion of food to the size of the food processor bowl is important, because if you don't have the proper turbulence inside the machine while it's pureeing, you won't be able to puree it. It'll all just get stuck to the sides, okay? So now I have the Idaho potatoes over here, but let me just give you a peek at this, you see? You see where this is right now? It looks like chopped carrot, okay? When we're done with this, because it's dry, it won't puree the way I want it to. But when we start adding the maple syrup and the cream and a little bit of butter to wet it up a little bit, it purees better then, see? So let's put some of the potato in there now. And again, hot food purees faster and better. So you want to make sure that your food is nice and hot. And again, I boiled the potatoes whole for the same reason, so they wouldn't get all wet. What would be the point in putting wet potatoes into a carrot puree, because you're trying to dry it out? Okay? So let's take some of the potato, put it in there. And while we have the food processor open, let's put a little bit of the nutmeg in there. Of course, you can grate fresh nutmeg in here if you want, and that works just fine. Be careful with the nutmeg, because there's such a thing as putting too much nutmeg. Now, you might opt to use white pepper instead of black pepper. I don't care, because these little black specks that are in there are not going to show up. This carrot puree is going to taste so good, nobody's going to care. But if you think that's an issue, then use white pepper when you do that, okay? And we're going to take a little bit of butter to start with. And let's check on that toast. Not quite. We'll probably have to make the puree and come back to the toast. It seems like it's taking a little while. But I'm going to add a pinch of cream to this. And we're going to put a little bit of maple syrup in it. Now, those other carrots are not quite done yet. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop for a minute, and I'm going to come right back. I'm going to give these carrots about 2 more minutes to cook, because I want to add them to this. I'll be right back in about 2 minutes. Okay, the 2 minutes or 3 minutes, 4 minutes as it elapsed, to make sure that the larger carrots are pureed. Adding them to the food processor right from the boiling water. Now, from time to time, when you're doing this sort of thing, when I go in, scrape everything down to make sure that it is getting equally pureed, and you don't have any pieces left on the sides. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit of syrup. And I'm going to add a little bit more butter. About 1.25 ounces here is what that looks like. Add a little bit more cream. Be careful with the cream, because the cream is what will make this into a coulis. But I'm going to show you, because I'm not going to take all of this out of here. I'm going to leave a little bit in there, add a little bit more liquid to it to show you the texture of a coulis. Put another little piece of potato in there. Let's get some hot potato out. Time to taste this. It's almost done. And let's have the melted butter from over by the microwave there, and candied pecans. Please, Louise. All right, let's give this stuff a pure. Now here, first of all, look. You see how it's not runny? This is important. Let's see how it tastes. It tastes good, and you know what? Of course, if you'd like to add less butter, you can still make this with less butter. It'll be fine. I'm going to add a pinch more syrup. This is what we call, what I would call, or what's referred to in the cooking business is, this is the finishing process again. It's just like making a sauce. And to finish your puree, you have to adjust it. I'm putting a little bit more butter in it. I put a little bit more syrup. I'm going to put a splash more cream. And I'm going to put a pinch more pepper. I'm going to puree it a little bit more. Now, one of the things I did was I saved 1 carrot. And I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with this as part of the garnish for the carrot puree, which I think you'll kind of like. You know, you can take something as simple as carrot puree and make it into an extremely fancy, quote, gourmet dish, if you will. I hate using that word. But you can, and it's a little bit like making mashed potatoes sexy. But, and that's very difficult to do. But carrot puree is even worse because people like potatoes a lot more than they like carrots. So dressing up a carrot to make people really want it is more work. Now let's have a taste of this now and see how this is. I was starting to like the taste, but now, since I added a little more butter, a little more cream, a little more maple syrup, it's a little bit tighter. So I'm going to add a little bit more potato again now. I mean, it's a little bit looser, rather, is what I meant. So I want to tighten this up just a little bit more. Put a little bit more potato in there. As I told you earlier in this lesson, what I'm teaching you is how to make a puree. You'll notice the process that I'm going to. So if I wasn't adding the potato, the only way that I could, quote, tighten this puree up so it would stand up on a plate, which is what you're looking for, you can serve it as a dollop rather than a tablespoon or whatever, is to dehydrate it somehow and get the water out of it so it stands up. The only way to do that is to either take the puree out of the food processor and put it in a, preferably a non-stick pan, which makes it a lot more comfortable to do, and then you slowly stir it on a low temperature and dry it. And as you'll see evaporation of water continuously during that process, and when the water stops evaporating, it'll be dry. You don't need necessarily to make it completely dry when all the water is evaporated, but that's how you would measure whether or not it's completely dry, by whether or not any more steam is coming off of it while it's drying. Now that would be method number 1 for drying it and making it pureed and tightening it without the potato. Method number 2 would be taking that same puree, laying it in some vessel, maybe a high-side, quote, saute pan, if you will, and putting a little bit of buttered baking paper on top of it versus a lid, because that would seal it and you'd never be able to evaporate and dry it, but the baking paper will allow dehydration. And you place that in the oven and from time to time go in and stir. It's another way of drying it. In the case of making, say, a turnip puree, where you want to maintain the color of white, you might want to dry the turnip puree in the oven because you won't get it discolored by accidentally browning it on top of the stove while you're drying it. So those would be the 2 ways that you can dry the puree without using potato, okay? So let's finish this one with the potato for now, though, but I hope I was clear about that. Okay, now let's give this a taste. We're coming to a close on the finishing of this carrot puree, but I want you to notice how this puree stands on the plate. Regardless of what it tastes like, you still have to have some texture.